Hey everybody, welcome to Cut, Transform, Glue. So this is where we left in the first episode of the Dragonfly Project, where I got the main body shape pretty much figured out. And the next steps could be to work on the wings holder right at the top, which will be a challenge on itself. I could also tackle the tail because I want to make it a bit longer, or even the landing gear, which will definitely be a complex part of the build. But this week I actually decided to work on the cockpits, the eyes of the Dragonfly, and for that I bought some very good looking transparent spheres, like Christmas tree decorations, which will be amazing for this build. Now those were actually pretty cheap, so I actually bought 30 of them, for future projects. Now, the first thing I had to decide is where to attach the eyes, and by that I mean how far I want to put them from the body of the aircraft, also vertically how high it should be, and of course how apart the eyes could sit in relation from each other. Now the spheres opens in half, so I had to also decide on the rotation. And after looking at it for a while, I decided to keep them a couple of centimeters from each other and from the body, and slightly down from the top. In all my projects, I like to keep most of the pieces separated from each other to make my life easier on the painting process. So ideally, the eyes would be attached to the body using a custom piece and a couple of bolts. So this is what I did first. Now, to be honest, a couple of bolts is a bit of an overkill just for the weight of the cockpit, but it's better to be safe than sorry, and it also helps me keeping the pieces aligned. On the top of that piece goes a bigger one that I made using the plastic sphere diameter for a perfect attachment. This is the beauty of incorporating 3D printing on junk bashing projects. And before I glued these spheres in place, I made a quick placement test using some hot glue. It is pretty amazing for these quick positioning tests, and I really recommend you guys doing the same. Now let me tell you, I was missing a bit of weirdness from this project, so the addition of the eyes made me very happy. But there were a ton of print lines on that big piece, which I had to take care first with a quick session of sanding. Then I glued a couple of fake Lego pieces on the empty spots I left on the front of the black shape that I'm sure some of you are wondering about. I then applied a ton of CA glue on the concave features where the eyes would be sitting, and using a wooden stick I made sure it was well distributed on the surface. Now the challenge right there was to glue both eyes on the same angle and not to glue the wrong side, which I of course did. Good thing that I decided to buy 30 of them. Now, of course, I needed to hide those two bolts on the front of the aircraft. This is why I include the fake Lego pieces in there. I simply made a matching shape to go on top of all that, on which I would later attach some good looking ribbies. I removed the studs from a couple of extra blocks, made everything extra flat and removed the sharp corners and glued them upside down on the next piece. And this is the piece that hides the two bolts. With that, I'll be able to keep everything nice and separated. On top of that, I want to put some cool shapes, so I grabbed my sorting boxes and went shopping. Where I found this one with that alien insect aesthetic that could work very well with the rest of the build. Then I looked for a couple of extra detail pieces to go with that one I just chose and combined them using more CA glue. I think of the space in between the two cockpits to be where some sensors and radars would be sitting, so that spot needs to be highly detailed. Now, the fit with some shapes was not perfect, so I had to use some sea glue with baking soda to close some tiny gaps. Then I had this crazy idea to make a fin using a 3mm styrene piece and attach it in between the eyes. I began by marking the shape I wanted on the styrene, the round corners and all, making all of the cuts and doing the finishing touches on my mini disc sander. Then I manually refined the shape using some sanding sticks, but when I saw how it looked against the model, I kinda hated it. So I decided to scrap that and start over. Went back to my sorting boxes, looking for a different idea, grabbing and testing some shapes against the model. The front of the aircraft is to me the most important feature of it. It's where there will be a couple of pilots, a ton of detailing, and really what will give this build some character, so it needs to be done correctly. So this is actually a place where I'm willing to go back and start over as many times as needed until I feel it's perfect. So this could all be different in the future, but for now, this is how I decided to go. I combined some acrylic shapes, resin pieces, and some good old junk bashing elements to try to achieve that sci-fi insect look I'm going for this project. I'm still very far away from the detailing phase, but I'm already using some highly detailed pieces on that spot. And the result was pretty interesting, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the comment section below. Let me know what you think of this solution. The next part I worked on was this radar thing that will be sitting under the cockpits, like a ground radar to spot structures and enemies down below. The plastic on this shape is kinda immune to CA glue, so I first did some light sanding on the whole piece to help with adhesion, and I'm also using some hot glue to join the pieces together. CA plus baking soda comes next, just to close the gaps. And just like I did on the other pieces, to make my life easier on the painting process, these are going to be connected using some fake Lego pieces. On the top and next to the tail, there was an open hole, where initially the on and off switch from the vacuum cleaner was installed. I needed to take care of that. Also, a great opportunity to include some detail shapes, maybe an extra radar, but this one pointing upwards, devoted to spot other flying objects or enemies. You'll notice that in this build I'm using more hot glue than normal. This project has more curves than my usual builds, and in these situations super glue might not be enough, so I'm being extra careful here. Once the gap was closed, I glued some resin printed round panels, and on the top of that goes the radar piece. Now that I'm thinking about it, this gray piece has been in my collection for many years, so I'm glad it finally found its place, other than my fingertips of course. To take care of the gap from the resin round panel to the body of the aircraft, I went with the quickest solution, some car body filler or polyester putty. I mixed a tiny amount of it and applied it with a wooden stick on the gap, trying to fill this spot. And the trick here is to begin sculpting it as soon as it gets solid, where it can be cut pretty easily. Remember, polyester putty gets rock hard in half an hour or even less, so as soon as it stops running, grab an X-Acto knife and begin removing some material. On the front of the radar there's an empty area that's very ugly. The blue plastic of the vacuum cleaner is not only bad with sanding and gluing, but also weirdly shaped, not as precise and pristine as the front half of it. So adding things to it would be ideal to hide some of the defects, and this is what I did with this simple 3D printed shape. And then I found this very good looking shape right here in my collection, one that I feel some of you might remember from a past project. This is the same piece that's on the nozzle of the Grippy Hunter, a build that I loved working on, and I'll include a link to the full build video of it on the description box. To me, this looks like some sort of antenna, and it kinda matches the radius of the shape that sits on the front of the aircraft, so I had to use it. Of course, I need to keep it separated from the rest of the build to be able to paint it later on the painting process. So again, I'm using some fake Lego pieces to create that attachment. This is the best way to attach some lightweight pieces. And this right here is pretty much how far I was able to go this week. A special thanks to all of my dear patrons. They make all of this possible, and please consider supporting this channel yourself. I'll put a couple of links down below. And as always, thanks for watching.